"Don't bring the baby, it'll ruin the photos," my sister said. Her words sharp as glass, though she delivered them with a casual smile, like she wasn't cutting me open in front of everyone. My dad didn't miss a beat. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and added, "We want nice pictures, something we can frame." I froze, clutching my son's tiny hand, his soft fingers wrapped around mine as if he could sense my sudden shame. The room was filled with laughter, wine glasses clinking, wedding magazines spread out on the coffee table, and yet all I heard was the blood pounding in my ears. They wanted nice pictures, and apparently my child, my beautiful boy, didn't qualify. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about one event or even about photographs. This was about the way my family had always seen me, the difficult one, the burden, the woman who had made mistakes and now carried proof of those mistakes in the form of a child they'd rather crop out of their memories. I wanted to speak, to defend him, to defend myself, but all I managed was a tight smile while heat rose in my throat. They moved on quickly, flipping through dresses and debating flowers, as if my son had never been mentioned, as if he were already erased. What they didn't know was that I wouldn't forget, and I wouldn't forgive. I drove home that night with my baby asleep in the back seat, the sound of his soft breathing filling the silence they had left behind in me. Streetlights blurred past through the windshield, and I kept replaying the moment. In my head, the way my sister's lips had curled when she said those words, the way my dad had chimed in like it was a shared joke. They weren't just excluding him from photos, they were excluding me from the family picture entirely. They wanted the polished version of our family, one that could be shown off to neighbors and coworkers, not the raw truth of who we were. And the raw truth was that I had a child out of wedlock, that my relationship had fallen apart, that I had walked back into their lives carrying a baby they didn't ask for. I remembered how, when I first told them I was pregnant, my mother had sighed heavily into the phone, like the weight of my choices pressed directly on her chest. My dad hadn't even said congratulations. He just asked if I was sure. But I had been sure. Sure that I could love him enough, raise him enough, protect him enough, even if the world and my own family turned against us. Sitting there in the car, watching the traffic lights change from red to green, I realized that this wasn't about a wedding or photographs or even appearances. This was about control. They had always wanted to decide how my life would look, what school I should go to, what career I should pursue, who I should date. And when I didn't listen, when I made choices that didn't fit their script, they punished me with silence, with exclusion, with little cutting remarks disguised as jokes. My sister was their shining star, the golden child who followed all the rules, who was getting married in the church with flowers and photographers and an entire guest list of people who adored her. She was the success story, and I was the cautionary tale. But as I looked at my son's reflection in the rearview mirror, his little face relaxed in sleep, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wasn't a mistake. And one day, they were going to see that. One day, I was going to make them see me differently. The days after that conversation felt heavier, like every phone call and every group text about the wedding carried an unspoken message meant for me alone. Stay quiet. Stay small. Don't make this about you. My sister sent out color swatches for the bridesmaids' dresses, as if I could forget she'd already made it clear that my son wasn't welcome in her perfect little world. I noticed how the family group chat buzzed with plans for the bridal shower, the rehearsal dinner, the catering tastings. Yet when I mentioned needing to bring my son along because I couldn't find childcare, the conversation went dead. Hours later, my mother replied with a single line, "Maybe it's best if you sit this one out." That was the phrase they all used, over and over. Sit this one out. As though my entire motherhood was a disruption. Something to be managed quietly, pushed to the edges. And I swallowed it for a while, because I was so used to playing that role in my family. I was the one who had to explain myself, to apologize, to shrink so others could shine. But at night, when I rocked my son to sleep, his tiny hand clutching at my shirt, I thought about what it would mean if I accepted that role forever. If I let him grow up seeing me treated as less, what lesson would that teach him about his own worth? I started keeping a journal then, writing down every remark, every slight, every plan they made without me. It wasn't just therapy. It was evidence. A record of the quiet cruelty they thought would go unnoticed. And the more I wrote, the more I realized I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't oversensitive. They truly wanted a family album without me in it. They wanted proof to show the world of a perfect family, the kind with matching outfits and smiling faces, untouched by scandal or struggle. And in their eyes, my son and I were flaws in the picture. But what they hadn't considered was this. I had no intention of fading quietly out of frame. The tension built slowly, like a storm you can see forming on the horizon but no one wants to acknowledge. Invitations went out, glossy and embossed with my sister's chosen theme, a perfect day. My name was there, printed neatly under bridesmaid, but nowhere did it mention children. I called her once, hoping maybe she'd soften, maybe she'd realize how cruel her words had been, but her tone was flat, rehearsed. It's not personal. We just don't want kids running around in the photos or crying during the vows. You understand? No, I didn't understand. My son wasn't kids. He was my family, my entire life. He wasn't a disruption. He was the reason I even survived the nights when I thought I couldn't go on. But I bit my tongue, because I knew arguing would only make them dismiss me more, brand me as dramatic, impossible, selfish. Meanwhile, I noticed the way they treated me in other conversations, asking if I could handle the dress costs, the travel, the makeup appointments, with little digs about my finances. I worked full-time, paid my bills, raised my son alone, and still they looked at me like I was barely holding on, like I should be grateful for scraps of inclusion. My dad, who had always been the judge in our family, dropped comments that stung, sharper than he probably realized. Just don't bring drama, okay? This is your sister's big day. Drama in his mind wasn't my sister's cruelty or my mother's indifference or his own cutting remarks. Drama was me daring to stand up for myself. But the more they pushed me aside, the more a quiet strength grew inside me. I stopped asking for permission. I started planning for what I would do when the moment came, when they tried to erase me. Entirely. I wasn't going to fight them in the way they expected, with tears or yelling or begging. No, I was going to wait, watch, and strike in a way they couldn't ignore. Because if they thought they could erase me from the picture, they were about to learn that sometimes the person you try hardest to hide ends up changing the whole story. By the time the bridal shower rolled around, I had already decided I wouldn't let them humiliate me again. I showed up in a pale blue dress that made me feel stronger than I had in months, holding my son's hand, daring them to say something to my face. The room went quiet for just a moment, enough for me to feel the weight of every pair of eyes. But then the chatter resumed, forced and overly cheerful, as though my presence was an inconvenience they had to cover up quickly. My sister's smile didn't reach her eyes when she hugged me, stiff and quick, then turned her attention back to her friends who were gushing over the centerpieces. I sat quietly, listening, watching, while the gift table filled with shiny boxes and delicate wrapping paper. They didn't know I had already taken steps they never thought I was capable of. I'd saved every text, every email, every cruel remark. I had spoken to the wedding photographer privately, someone I knew through a mutual friend, and explained that I wanted all raw copies of the photos, every single shot, not just the polished ones. I told him I'd pay double for them if necessary. He had looked at me curiously but agreed, paperwork signed and sealed. If my family wanted me out of their perfect wedding album, I was going to make sure the truth existed somewhere else. A record of what really happened, of who was really there, of the child they tried to erase. And quietly, I began building something even bigger. I reached out to an aunt who had long since distanced herself from the family because of the same treatment I now faced. She had warned me years ago, said they only valued appearances, that love was always conditional with them. When I told her everything, her voice trembled with both anger and relief. It's the same story, generation after generation, she said. But you can end it if you're brave enough. That was the first time I realized my plan wasn't just about a wedding or photos or revenge. It was about breaking the cycle they thought I was too weak to resist. And I wasn't weak anymore. The wedding day arrived wrapped in perfection. Rows of white chairs on the lawn, string lights swaying above, a manicured archway dripping with roses. Guests whispered about how beautiful everything looked, how flawless my sister was in her gown, how proud my parents must be. I stood at the edge with my son, who clutched a small toy car in his hand, and felt the weight of every decision I had made leading up to this day. They hadn't wanted him there, but I brought him anyway, dressed in a tiny button-down shirt and slacks, his hair combed neatly, his face glowing with innocence. When people saw him, they didn't see a disruption. They saw beauty, joy, life. He charmed the guests without even trying, little giggles slipping out as he waved at strangers, and I watched as people bent down to greet him, their smiles genuine. My parents noticed. My sister noticed. But they kept their jaws tight, their eyes flicking past him like he was invisible. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if maybe they were right and I should step back, stay small. But standing there in the middle of their curated fantasy, I knew I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for. During the ceremony, the photographer did his job as promised, snapping every moment, not just the staged ones. My son in my lap. My father's quick frown when he noticed. My sister's smile faltering when her perfect day refused to stay under her control. I didn't make a scene. I didn't need to. I just stayed present, refusing to be erased. Later, at the reception, while champagne glasses clinked and the music swelled, I caught the photographer's nod from across the room, our quiet agreement sealed. My family might choose the polished album for themselves, the version where I didn't exist, where my son was left out of frame, but I would have the real record. And when the time came, when they least expected it, I would decide how that truth was shown. When the reception hit its peak, laughter filling the air and glasses raised high, I stood to the side, watching my sister bask in her perfect spotlight. The toast rolled on, long speeches about loyalty, unity, and family, all dripping with words that had never once been extended to me. My dad even choked up when he said, "This is what family is all about, standing together and celebrating love." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy of it. Standing together? They had spent months making sure I was pushed out, my son treated like an afterthought. But instead of letting anger consume me, I let the quiet strength I had been nurturing carry me through. My son tugged at my arm, wanting to dance, and I picked him up and spun him around the edge of the dance floor. For a moment, the music and his laughter drowned out everything else. I noticed the way people looked at us, not with disapproval, but with soft smiles, like they saw something genuine amidst all the staged perfection. That's when it hit me. No matter how much my family tried to erase us, they couldn't control the way others perceived the truth. People saw what they wanted to ignore: the bond, the love, the resilience. Later, when the cake was cut and everyone crowded around for photos, I stayed in the background. I didn't push forward or fight for a spot. I didn't need to. My sister wanted a flawless album, one without me or my child, but the photographer I had hired quietly captured us anyway. Not posed, not polished, just real. My son reaching for me kneeling down to kiss his cheek, small moments that spoke louder than any staged portrait. And as the night wound down, I felt no shame, no regret. Let them curate their version of reality, I thought. Because in my hands, I held the proof that their story wasn't the only one. And soon enough, they would learn that truth has a way of slipping through, even in the pictures they try hardest to perfect. Weeks after the wedding, the carefully curated album arrived at my parents' house, glossy pages filled with staged perfection. My sister glowing in her gown, my parents beaming beside her, relatives frozen in polite smiles. And yet as I flipped through it during a strained family dinner, I noticed the gaping holes. No sign of me holding my bouquet at the ceremony, no trace of my son laughing with the guests, no candid shots of us dancing together. It was as though we had never been there at all. My sister hovered proudly, showing off the book like it was proof of a flawless family legacy. "Doesn't it look amazing?" she said, her eyes flicking toward me, daring me to object. But I didn't. I simply smiled and nodded because I had something better. At home, waiting for me, was the hard drive the photographer had slipped into my hand at the end of the night. Every unedited photo, every hidden truth, every raw moment they had tried so hard to crop out. My son's joy, my father's cold stares, my mother's forced smile when she realized people were paying attention to the baby she wanted erased. It was all there. And as I scrolled through those images alone at my kitchen table, I realized I held the power they had tried to deny me. This wasn't about ruining my sister's wedding. It was about reclaiming the narrative they had stolen. I uploaded a few of the photos. Nothing malicious, nothing staged, just me and my son looking like what we were, a family. The response was immediate. Friends commented about how beautiful he was, how radiant I looked, how love practically glowed from the pictures. Strangers even shared them, calling them authentic, calling them real. And slowly, the contrast between my sister's stiff, polished album and the warmth of mine began to spread. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years reached out, telling me they saw the photos and felt like they finally understood. My family wanted me invisible, but instead, they had made me unforgettable. The ripple effect came faster than I expected. My sister's wedding album circulated through the family like gospel, but side by side, people couldn't ignore the difference when they saw my photos. At a cousin's barbecue a month later, I overheard relatives whispering, "Why didn't they include her? Why isn't the baby in the pictures?" It wasn't pity I saw in their eyes when they looked at me. It was recognition, as though the veil had finally lifted and they saw the truth for themselves. My dad tried to control the damage, calling me late one night with that same clipped tone he used when I was a teenager in trouble. "You knew what you were doing posting those. You're embarrassing the family." His voice was firm, but beneath it, I caught something new. Fear. Fear that his version of events was slipping away. My sister texted me the next morning, venom dripping between her carefully chosen words. "You always have to make everything about you, don't you?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying with a single line. "It's not about me, it's about the truth." And that truth kept spreading. The aunt I had confided in shared my photos with old friends of the family, people who still believed my parents' narrative that I was reckless, selfish, a disappointment. But when they saw me smiling with my son, strong and steady despite it all, the cracks in that story became impossible to ignore. Soon, invitations to family events started arriving addressed only to me, without the unspoken rules and restrictions. Cousins began asking to visit, to bring gifts for my boy, to reconnect. My parents hated it. They wanted control, but they no longer had it. The silence that once shamed me now shamed them. And I realized something powerful. Revenge didn't have to be loud or vengeful. It could be as simple as refusing to disappear, as quiet as showing up with love they couldn't destroy, as steady as proof they couldn't erase. They had spent months trying to cut me out of the picture, but in the end, it was their own cruelty that wrote me back into the center. I never planned on revenge, not in the traditional sense. I didn't storm the altar, I didn't sabotage the ceremony, I didn't scream or fight. I simply stood my ground, held my son's hand, and refused to be erased. But life has a way of handing out justice quietly, almost poetically, when you least expect it. 6 months after the wedding, my sister's perfect marriage began to show cracks. The man she had fought so hard to impress the world with wasn't the fairy tale she had promised everyone. Rumors trickled back through the family, arguments, financial stress, even whispers that he was unfaithful. And though I took no joy in her pain, I couldn't help but notice the irony. She had tried to build her legacy on appearances, while I built mine on truth. People noticed the difference. While her Instagram filled with carefully curated smiles that fooled fewer and fewer, mine filled with real moments. My son's first steps, messy hair mornings, laughter that wasn't staged for a camera. And the comments told the story my family never could. "You look so happy. He's beautiful. You're strong. We see you." That was the revenge I never had to lift a finger for. Being seen, being recognized, being valued, not for fitting their mold, but for breaking it. My dad grew quieter with each passing holiday. He couldn't deny the way relatives gravitated toward me now, how the same people who once praised my sister now asked about my son first, how they pulled me aside to say they admired my resilience. My mother tried to keep the peace, inviting, me with forced warmth. But the balance had shifted. They no longer had the power to decide if I was worthy of being included. I decided whether or not I would show up. The final shift came when I received a call from the photographer, months after the wedding. "I thought you'd like to know," he said. "People keep asking me about those photos of you and your boy. They say it's the most real thing they've seen in a long time. I'd like to feature one in my portfolio." I sat there stunned, staring at my laptop where my sister's wedding album sat forgotten in a folder. Never printed, never framed. And then I looked at the picture he meant, the one of me kneeling in the grass, kissing my son's cheek as he laughed, sunlight catching his hair. No gowns, no archways, no staged perfection, just us. Real, raw, unforgettable. That was when I realized revenge had already taken place. They had tried to make me small, invisible, forgettable. Instead, they made me undeniable. My story wasn't polished, but it was authentic, and authenticity lasts longer than stage smiles ever will. My family wanted to hang pictures on their walls to prove to the world that we were perfect. But the truth is, the only picture that mattered was the one they tried hardest to keep out, the one that proved love can't be erased. And if they ever look back years from now, flipping through their albums and wondering why something feels missing, they'll know. They'll remember what they did, and they'll know it wasn't me who ruined their photos. It was them who ruined their own story by trying to cut mine out. I don't need their approval anymore. I have my son. I have the truth. And I have the proof that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't shouting to be heard. It's living so loudly in your own light that their silence becomes meaningless. So let them keep their albums. I'll keep my life. And trust me, one day when they look at what I built compared to what they tried to hide, they'll realize I was never the flaw. In the picture, I was the frame that held it all together.